What's up, everybody? Today we are going to be looking at my best, worst figures of 2024 that are not Transformers, non-Transformers figures. These are the reviews that I do on Patreon, along with like some of the other Legend stuff and Chug stuff that I don't put on my channel here. So it's still good and fun to recap it at the end of the year. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll get started with most disappointing. So these are the most disappointing figures of the year. That doesn't mean they're bad, it just means they're disappointing. It means that there was a precedent that was set prior that somehow made me expect more. And we'll start with number 5. And number 5 is this Mezco the Mask figure. I love the Mask, I love the Dark Horse comic. I was excited about seeing this, although I do have kind of a touch and go history with Mezco in regards to how I feel about their figures, but threw the dice on this one, and this one ended up being one that let me down. So the weapons are really heavy, the wrists are not toleranced well enough to hold the weapons. The accessories here are the gimmick and kind of owning the figure, and when you can't perform that well, you're already cutting your feet out from underneath you. Then it has kind of the Mezco issue of limited articulation due to the soft goods over top, which sometimes they can circumvent better than others, and this is just not one of their best efforts, which left me disappointed. Number 4, Ramen Toys Great White. This is an interesting one. Let me explain why. This is a good toy. This is a good purchase. There's nothing wrong about it. It comes in at number 4 on my disappointing list because for my entire life, I've always wanted a Gloria with her car that was kind of true to the cartoon, you know, minus like the first 5 years of my life. So it's like 38 years I've wanted this, and I just expected it to hit better when I got it. And I think because Ramen Toys is upscaling everything, which does make them a lot more fun in a lot of ways, the fact that it doesn't fit in with my mask collection somehow ended up making me feel empty, when for 38 years I thought it was all I ever wanted, you know, for a mask collection. And because of that, it makes number 4 on my list. But make no mistake, this is not a bad purchase. This is a great piece. It just let me down because my expectations were somewhere else. Coming in at number 3 on my list is SH Figuarts Guile. Once again, not a bad figure. It's just it had been so long since SHF had put out a Street Fighter figure, and with Jada Toys kind of putting theirs out, I kind of expected this to just hit different, as the kids say, and it didn't. It kind of like a lot of the washed out elements, one of my shoulders was kind of jammed and stuck. There was just a lot of elements of this that, like, I think in comparison to the Jada Toys, I wanted it to feel like a knockout. Instead, it felt like more of a, I don't know, a two-piece, maybe a left jab and a right hook. But I was kind of like, man, this is like 3 or 4 times the price. It's time to like show them how it's done. And don't get me wrong, it's superior than a Jada Toys figure by far. But I don't know, some of the washed out elements, some of the sculpt, some of the build tolerances, like it somehow left me like, meh. I think also the wait for something new, you know, had they put out something a little bit more consistently, maybe it wouldn't have bothered me. But the fact that I've been waiting a while for another SHF Street Fighter and this is what I got was kind of like, meh. My number 2, Mezco Snake Eyes. Now, this is for a couple reasons. For one, he comes with a ton of great accessories that you can't really store on him all that well. The soft goods get in the way of the figure. That's something that with Mezco, it either goes that way or it doesn't. Unfortunately, this is one where it goes that way. It also had some like limited ankle movement, which really kind of stunt what's possible with the figure. And then on top of all that, to me, it had an exceptionally long neck. And it was also disappointing because in the same time, I looked at the Storm Shadow and was kind of like impressed with how good that one was. So, you know, doing this one in the same time frame kind of made this one feel more disappointing. And my number 1 is Super 7 Snarf. And mainly because, look, the amount of money that I've dumped into Super 7 on mediocre figures at best in order to get characters that I just don't think will get made otherwise is a staggering amount of money for a very subpar product. But that being said, this was the last piece that I needed to get, and I kind of felt like, man, it's all going to feel worth it when I get this one. And guess what? Nope. Just another expensive figure from Super 7 that can't do half of what a Hasbro figure can do for 25 bucks. So not only did I feel disappointed in this figure, I felt disappointed in the entire line, and I felt disappointed in myself for going in on the line after getting this figure. So he had to come in at number 1. And there are my most disappointing figures of 2024. And unfortunately, I bought a fair amount of these, all but one, so I didn't dodge many bullets. But once again, it doesn't mean they're bad. Like, I don't think the Mask figure's bad. Guile's definitely not bad. And the Ramen Toys is the best one of them. And then, to be honest, the Snarf is the only bad one. They just didn't do what I wanted them to do in some way, shape, or form. So, you know, that's why they made this list. Moving on to the surprisingly good figures. Now, once again, this doesn't mean that these figures are great. It just means that I didn't expect as much as I got out of them. So we'll start with number 5, Revoltech's Amazing Yamaguchi Moon Knight. I've looked at a number of Amazing Yamaguchi figures. I own a number of Amazing Yamaguchi figures. What this figure was able to do that's different is really nail the A stance, which they have been getting closer and closer to getting right. But they pack so much articulation engineering into these things that oftentimes they have a hard time just looking normal. This one does normal incredibly well. That, along with a great cape and great paint, made this figure kind of just surprisingly good. It's like an overall great action figure that's incredibly articulated instead of an incredible articulated action figure. That's a pretty good figure. Do you know what I mean? Moving on to number 4. So piggybacking off of the other Mezco, this is the Mezco Storm Shadow. Once again, having just looked at the Snake Eyes in the same period of time, this one does it all a lot better. The soft goods, while a little pajama jammy, don't get in the way in the same way that the Snake Eyes do. And he doesn't have some of the other technical issues with some of like the wrists and things that I ran into with the Snake Eyes. But it's really largely based off of my feelings towards the Snake Eyes, why I was surprised, like pleasantly surprised by the Storm Shadow, which should hopefully make sense. Number 3, Flame Toys Megazord. And I think you guys will understand what I'm putting down here. So I looked at the Flame Toys Star Victory, Star Saber, Leo thing, the lion with the Star Saber that combine, and it was a complete and utter mess. So I had very low expectations on them doing another combiner element, but this Megazord was surprisingly done well. Like, it was outstanding. Whereas my previous experience with them in this sort of arena was less than, let's say. And as a result, left me pleasantly surprised. Very solid, stable, combining figure in both modes. So, good on them for it. Number 2, Jada Toys Chester Cheetah. This figure almost pisses me off because of how goofy it is and simultaneously how well it's done. You would just think that because of the dynamics of the figure and character design that it would lend itself to being awful, and somehow Jada Toys found a way to make it look good, and make it play well, and make it stable at a very, very, very affordable price point given what you get. So I thought this figure was going to be, worse than Super 7, and it ended up being better than a Hasbro product, which left me pleasantly surprised. And then my number 1 choice is Mafex Bane, and I'm going to tell you why. This figure's so well done that I kind of like the way he looks. Let me explain. I've never been a comic book Bane fan in terms of his character design. His character itself has been cool, but the way he looks, I've always had an issue with. I've always thought he's one of the dumbest looking characters of all time. I love the way that Nolan did him in Dark Knight Rises. You can feel however you feel about it. I personally love it. I just always hated this design, but this figure was so good that it actually made me like the design, and I can tell you no one was more surprised than me. So I had to put it number 1 on the list. And there they are. There's my top 5 surprisingly good figures. Unfortunately, I only had one of these. I had all but one of the disappointing figures, and I only have one of the surprisingly good figures. But, you get what you get. You don't get upset. That's the luck of the dice. You know what I mean? Luck of the draw, roll of the dice. All right, let's move on to our worst figures of the year. Let's see how many of these bad boys I got in my collection. These are, in my opinion, the worst figures I've looked at that don't transform, or that aren't part of the Transformers brand, I should say. Number 5, Sentinel Toys Wolverine. And to be honest, all of these Sentinel Toys Marvel figures, they're awful. There's so much engineering in these figures. They obviously cared. They obviously put the effort in. There's so much paint on these figures. They obviously cared. They obviously put the effort in. But they put all of that effort and care into a figure that doesn't work. A lot of the articulation doesn't work. The joints are problematic. The issue is that they put in all of this joints and all this engineering, but the actual allowance for the movement of those joints doesn't actually work well. And then on top of that, they give you like these robotic faces, which just sort of seems like a cop-out. I understand it's an aesthetic and stylized choice, but it doesn't come across that way. It comes across as like they're not able to do anything else. But they end up being very painted, very expensive figures that aren't anywhere near as good, in my opinion, as a Mafex. Number 4, Super 7 Wily Kit and Wily Cat for a tie. Once again, we're just trying to finish the line. Could they give us these 2 figures in a 2-pack for all that they've charged us for these previous figures that are awful? Nope. Just charge you an additional sum of money for both of these that are also equally awful. Archaic articulation, archaic sculpt work, sold at a premium price to leave you feeling utterly empty. I am more happy to be done with Super 7 than I am to be done with any other company in the existence of toy making. Awful figures. My number 3 is Hiya Toys Godzilla. This thing is just, there's just nothing you can do with it. It just stands there. It's like, it's supposed to be a toy. It's supposed to be a figure, but it really belongs on the island of Misfit Toys. Like, it doesn't do much. It has all these joints and engineering built in. You just can't really use much of it. Like, the materials are so stiff and tough. And on top of that, the range of motion that's built in is so limited and it's so bulky that it just gets in its own way. It's like the action figure with the most joints that can't do the most or can do the least. It would win for being able to do the least with the most potential. Good sculpt, good paint, all that kind of stuff. Just hope you like him standing there, because that's what he's gonna do. Number 2, 89 Batman from Hot Toys. It just feels like it should be able to do more, right? And I understand that he couldn't do a whole lot in the film, but it's like, you know, you spend the money, let me do a little bit more. Just very limited articulation in the body, specifically the head, obviously, but the body as well. The rubber suit looks great, but it's very restrictive. The cowl doesn't sit super nice on the cape, and the cape itself is utter trash, and the cape is probably, next to the cowl, the most important thing that this figure needed to get right, and it didn't. And as a result, it has to make my list for worst. And then the number 1 on my list is the Mix and Match Assassin, I think was his name, or Hell's Assassin. It was their Deathstroke. It is awful. The hands don't support the weapons. The hands don't swap out well. There's dry brushing on it, but it's incredibly heavy-handed and looks sloppy as if a 3-year-old did it. The articulation is limited. The armor slips on and off. Like, there's very little I can say about the figure that's positive in any way, shape, or form. Just a whole lot to say that's negative. It's without a doubt the worst. It is the worst figure I looked at all year long, undoubtedly. And there's the worst figures of the year. Hey, and at least I guess I bought 3. Or no, it's really only 2 though, right? It's 3 figures, but it's only taking up 2 slots. But that's really just me tricking myself, isn't it? I really bought 3 of the worst figures. You know, and then I dodged the bullet on a few more. So, oh well. You get what you get and you don't get upset. But it wasn't my year for non-transforming figures. Moving on to best figures of the year. Let's see how many of these bad boys I ended up with. And we'll start with number 5, Jada Toys Street Fighter DJ. This figure pretty much hits all the buttons it's supposed to hit. Has pad printed paint, has subtle shading, has a real metal necklace, has swap out heads and hands, great articulation, decent sculpt, decent build, etc., etc. Like, literally my biggest complaint about this figure is that he's the character that I'm least interested in seeing them produce. That's a pretty nice complaint to have. Number 4, G.I. Joe Road Pig. Now, this is a deluxe figure, but you get what you pay for here. Comes with a ton of accessories, comes with different head options, including reimagined Road Pig options that I do actually like and find interesting. I don't use them for my display, but I love seeing a different take on them. The dog that he came with was awesome. He's not pictured here, but he's awesome as well. It's decent articulation for the size of the figure, great sculpt, clean paint, tons of it, you know, at a figure that was under $50. You know, I can tell you I've spent a lot more on figures that don't perform as well. I mean, we just looked at the Super 7 stuff, right? This is a very affordable figure for what it actually is. It also keeps that motif deco-wise throughout the weapons and everything of like the rope. Like, it's really, really, really a smart figure. Number 3, Sentinel Toys Spider-Man Noir. A far cry from that Wolverine mess. This is a great figure. Everything works beautifully. The articulation, the coat, surprisingly, with the articulation that's in the coat, sometimes stuff like that ends up looking super goofy. Not here. Exceptionally done, exceptional accessories, everything just down the board. Check, 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 check. Just a beautifully crafted figure. Number 2, Heat Boys Michelangelo. Last year, Leonardo was my figure of the year. This year, Michelangelo falls to slot 2, mainly because some of the accessory choices didn't really make sense to me for the character, but that doesn't mean it wasn't exceptionally well done. Great sculpt, great paint, great materials, tons of accessories, blah, blah, blah. Like, definitely a purchase that's well worth your money. And number 1, I'm not sure if this has happened before, but Mafex, I think it has in recent years. Mafex has really solidified themselves in recent years as being a force to be reckoned with, and their Daredevil figure is pretty much just perfect. Perfect sculpt, perfect paint, perfect articulation, perfect accessories. It's one of those figures where I struggled to find something to complain about or criticize. It's just exceptionally well done for what you get at a moderately affordable price point, given that it's an import, and would definitely satisfy any Daredevil fan or action figure fan. It is, in my opinion, the definitive 1/12 scale Daredevil by far. And there they are. And I was able to nab a couple of these at this category. But, you know, like I said, like the other ones are great. I don't need, like, even the Daredevil, like I think he's figure of the year. But for my shelf, swapping him out with my Hasbro one, like nobody's even going to notice. You know what I mean? I'll know it, but no one else will notice. And it's not going to like raise the value of the shelf. You know what I mean? Like it's just going to look like another Daredevil. So unfortunately, I'm at a place with a lot of this stuff where I'm not buying a lot of it anymore. But it is nice to grab a couple of the figures that I do kind of subjectively, but as objective as I can be, feel are some of the best figures of the year. At least I was able to grab 2. Let's take a look at all of them. So, and there's a look at, you know, my figures for the year, the non-transforming that I bought that are on this list. And, you know, it's a mixed bag. It's unfortunate that most of the great figures that I've looked at this year have not been for my own personal collection. But really, at this point in the game, I'm not in the business of buying great figures. I'm in the business of buying figures to represent characters that I need. And then I just hope that they're great. Unfortunately, a lot of them didn't make the top 5 this year. But, oh well, you know, you get what you get and you don't get upset. So anyway, we have one more top-bottom list to do. And that is the best worst of my purchases, like only my purchases for the year, and we'll get to that very soon. All right, hope that helped, hope you were entertained at least, and thanks for listening, thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.